Two women with a lot in common. Both Canadian, both with successful careers, and both say fashion executive Peter Nygard raped them.
When I found out that there was this case against him now, and I heard that the victims were as young as they were, and I read the details of the things that he had done to other women, I felt an immense amount of guilt over the fact that I had not charged him at the time, and felt like I could have perhaps prevented some of that from happening to other women and girls, children.
How could somebody like him go on for 40 years? Police knew about it, media knew about it, everybody knew about it. And yet, because he was wealthy or, you know, a so-called success story, he just rolled through like a knife through butter, hurting people, just harming people.
Derek, it's Jana.
You may have seen them both before. April Tellick has over 100 TV and movie credits.
I will do what I have to protect myself.
I like a man in uniform.
And Casey Allen led a busy international modeling career. The rape that Casey Allen describes predates the majority of the dozens of sexual assault allegations against Nygard. Allen says it happened to her over 40 years ago. It was the fall of 1979, and she'd just entered the University of Manitoba. Back then, she says, her weekends were for clubbing.
It was really not about meeting boys or drinking. It was really about just getting out together and dancing all night.
Peter Nygard's fondness for nightlife and the spotlight are well documented too, here by Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. In Winnipeg, a popular spot was Bogart's. That's where Allen says she would often see Nygard. His story was local legend, the Finnish immigrant who became a multi-millionaire fashion mogul.
Growing up in Winnipeg, Peter Nygard was very much on the radar. He was a big personality. He was hard to miss. And he was known by reputation too, and it wasn't necessarily a very attractive reputation.
Casey Allen was still under the legal drinking age then, not yet 18. Nygard was 38.
I'm not sure at the age of 17 that I was aware he was a predator, but we all knew that he was pushy and bad news.
Look in your eyes so I can see.
You know, he was circling. He was sort of a shark, buying drinks, checking everybody out, and being very unsubtle about it.
She says one night when she went to take a taxi home, there he was.
I don't remember how Peter and I transitioned from being in the club to being in his car, except that he overheard us talking and offered me a ride, and I accepted.
But their first stop was the Winnipeg warehouse where Nygard kept an apartment.
He threw me on the bed, pinned me using his forearm across my throat, ripped off my underwear, I would have been wearing a dress, and raped me, with me fighting as hard as I could. And I'm 5'11", but he's strong, and he was practiced at it. It wasn't date rape, it wasn't, oh, come on, please, 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 no, 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 come on, come on. It was full-on, fast, brutal, physical rape.
Casey Allen says she stayed silent while Nygard drove her home and didn't tell her parents everything that happened, afraid of what they might do.
And I was protecting my dad and my mom. If you tell your father, you have to be prepared that he's going to want to do something with that. And I wasn't prepared to put my whole family into turmoil.
But she says she did tell close friends about it, though she didn't use the word rape.
And I certainly told everybody who was close to me that I'd had a bad event. And so that puts me in a situation where I'm not having to say this for the first time to people. My friends and family aren't hearing this for the first time 40 years later. We wish you'd said something. Why didn't you say something? I did. And now I'm just telling the rest of the world what happened.
Casey Allen went on to a successful career as a model in New York, Milan, LA. Today, she lives in Savannah, Georgia, still trying to forget that awful night in Winnipeg, she says.
Wearing Nygard clothing.
And for April Tellick from North Vancouver, she says she also can't forget something that happened in Winnipeg. It was 1993. She was 20, Nygard in his 50s.
That invitation to Winnipeg was a huge turning point in my life. It impacted me in more ways than I thought it could or would. It changed my life forever.
Until then, she'd never had any doubt about where she wanted her life to go.
And all the way from kindergarten, I think, or maybe even grade 1, it was always actress and model.
She was representing Canada in international beauty pageants when Peter Nygard called with what seemed a business proposition.
He said he thought that I would be great as the model for his signature line, and that I should come to Winnipeg.
So in November 1993, on a ticket from Nygard, she arrived in Winnipeg with high hopes.
I was very excited to be with a Canadian designer in Winnipeg doing what I thought was going to be a really exciting next chapter in my career, in my life.
She says a friend, who happened to be a Nygard relative, picked her up at the airport and drove to a company warehouse, which also contained offices for Nygard and some employees. There was a separate space for this apartment used by Nygard. April Telek had no way of knowing how similar what was about to happen would be to the experience Casey Allen says she had.
And he showed me around, and I said, "Where am I staying?" And he said, "Here." And it turned out it was with him. And he said, "Well, what did you think was going to happen?" And I said, I thought I was coming for work. It was pretty obvious to me at that point that he was expecting more. And I said, "I am not going to sleep with you tonight. I will not sleep with you tomorrow. That is never going to happen."
But she says Nygard wouldn't take no for an answer.
He exposed himself, and he wanted me to give him oral sex. I said, "Just let me go. Just please. I'm just gonna leave. I don't need to stay here. I don't want to stay here. And he said, "I can't let you go." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, I can't risk you telling somebody." I was terrified of him. But I turned away and tried to crawl over the couch away from him, and he flipped me around and obviously wanted to have sex with me, and I was fighting, saying no. And then I just lay there and let it happen.
Telek says Peter Nygard held her against her will, raping and sexually assaulting her. At different times, she said it could have been for 2 or 3 days, but that while it went on, she saw just one other person, a man who brought some food, and the apartment door was always locked. According to April, while Nygard was asleep, she went to the bathroom inside the apartment and was able to call another Winnipeg friend, who also happened to be a Nygard relative. He said he would come to get her in his truck. Later, incredibly, she says she found the key to the door.
And I looked up and I saw the key in the lock of the wood door. And I've held on to this thought for all these years that it was the guy who came in with the food, and that he heard me, or he felt that I needed help, and he put the key there. I don't know for sure. I don't know. But the key was there.
Nygard was still asleep when she was picked up outside. Then she called her mother in Vancouver, who'd already reported her missing to the RCMP. They sent the Winnipeg police to check on her, but she says she was afraid to talk about what had happened. Did you tell your parents all of it?
I didn't tell my parents that I was raped.
She says she did tell her mother, father, and the Mounties she had been held captive for days, but she took her family's advice not to press charges against Peter Nygard.
Nygard said at one point, "I will ruin you." And I believe that to be true, and I was scared of that, but I was scared of my life. I was scared of all of it, and I was scared of retribution, but I took that advice, and I did not press charges at that time.
That was November 1993. 27 years passed. Then this.
A titan of Canadian fashion is facing sexual assault allegations from victims who were as young as 14 at the time.
This past February, that U.S. class action lawsuit was announced. The first 10 women accusing Peter Nygard of rape or sexual assault.
We've spoken in our investigation to women that have been party to the various things that have occurred at the hands of Mr. Nygard.
And that's when, out of the blue, April Tulloch got a Facebook message from none other than the RCMP officer who'd interviewed her decades before.
And he said, I'm thinking of you. It must be you must be having a hard time with this, but I'm thinking of you. It looks like that, blah, blah, Nygard is finally going to get what he deserves.
We contacted that Mountie, who's still a member of the RCMP, and he confirmed he did reach out to April Tulloch recently, because he says he's always believed there was more to her story about Peter Nygard than she said at the time, and his cop's intuition told him it involved sexual assault.
Having read some other material about Nygard, to me he's not any different than Epstein or Weinstein.
For 30 years, Noreen Waters was a Vancouver police officer and detective, an expert on sexual offenses.
They were protected, a lot of these, because they're high-profile people, so they're protected along the way. And nobody wants to proceed because they think, oh, well, if I proceed, you know, it'll be splashed all over, it'll ruin my life, because so often they got away with it for so many years.
But in recent months, we've spoken to 9 women from Canada, the U.S., and the Bahamas who've come forward to tell us about being raped or sexually assaulted by Peter Nygard, when some were as young as 14 or 15 years old. Through his lawyers, Nygard has repeatedly denied the accusations, including those of April Tulloch and Casey Allen, insisting they were all fabricated and paid for as part of a conspiracy to destroy his reputation, led by his rival in the Bahamas, U.S. hedge fund billionaire Louis Bacon. According to Noreen Waters, with no statute of limitations for rape in Canada, and with an effective sex tourism law, even if many of Nygard's alleged acts occurred abroad, he could, and should, be criminally charged here.
I think life in prison would probably be the best thing. It would give him no other chance to victimize another young woman. So there has to be some way to stop him, and it's obvious that the only way to stop him would be for him to be prosecuted and be incarcerated.
April Tulloch says that's why she's publicly speaking out now, after struggling with her memories for decades. In response, Nygard's lawyers call April Tulloch's story impossible. They say that warehouse was always busy, and someone was bound to notice if she was being held captive there. They also sent us sworn statements from those 2 Nygard relatives who April says were involved. One says she wasn't even in the country at the time, and the other says after he picked April up at the warehouse, he saw no indication she had been raped. He adds that she was fully clothed and composed. She certainly made no mention of having been raped or drugged or locked up, or about any misconduct by Peter Nygard. She said she was looking for support from Nygard, but felt she was wasting her time by seeking his assistance.
I feel like I will be able to really finally say goodbye when that man pays for what he did to me and for so many others. With public shaming. I want him to go to jail. I want him to pay for what he did to all of us, and then I will feel like our voices were heard, and then maybe he'll go away for good.
And Casey Allen feels the same way.
I'm enraged by the fact it took a civil lawsuit to gain the attention of authorities. No, I would rather not be part of a class action suit. I'd rather be on the witness stand, sending that man to jail.
They have both now signed on to the U.S. civil lawsuit against Nygard. Allen insists she would welcome being part of a criminal prosecution as well.
I would love to pick up the phone and tell a police officer my story. I'm trying to do everything I can to support the women, anything within my power that can advance their case, and if that's filing charges personally on my own behalf, I will, after this interview is over, I'll pick up the phone and call Winnipeg.
And Casey Allen has told us that's exactly what she did. She says she expects to meet with Winnipeg police in person before long.